Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Global Korea Convention 2020. This is the Korean and ASEAN session, and I'm from Kiev. First of all, I would like to invite Dr. Kwon Yul, who is the head of Kiev's Center for International Development Cooperation, to deliver the opening address. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kwon Yul, and I'm head of the Kiev Center for International Development Cooperation. We have many participants logging in and watching the session at YouTube. And we have with us Mr. Han-gu-yeol and also His Excellency Umar Hadi, who is going to deliver an address via video. We have been fostering a cooperation platform with the help of NRC. And this platform was established in June 2019. And due to COVID-19, we face a growing need for international cooperation. And so the Korean government, in response to the calls for Korea's participation for greater in international cooperation, Korean government is committed to doing more. We are seeing greater trade protectionism, and we need to come up with wise measures to overcome the current crisis and the growing trade protectionism and to achieve greater international cooperation. In November, the 21st Korea-ASEAN Summit and Korea-Mekong Summit are important opportunities to expand our strategic partnership with the ASEAN region. So today, we are going to talk about the way forward for creating a people-centric community of peace and prosperity across Korea and the ASEAN region. So we want to shift slightly away from a focus on, politics and economy, and we want to focus more on establishing a broader community of cooperation. And I hope that this forum will help us look into the various challenges that we face so that we can come up with a way forward for both Korea and the ASEAN economies toward a greater peace and prosperity. And I hope to hear great insights from the presenters and the panelists today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Kwon, for that speech.
And next, I'd like to invite Secretary Han-gu-yeol from the Presidential Office, and he's also the Secretary of New South Policy Department. Because he could not be here with us, he sent us a video message. Good morning. I am Han-gu-yeol from the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy. Despite the challenging circumstances due to the spread of COVID-19, we are here today to talk about the cooperation between ASEAN and Korea. It is a significant and timely occasion, and I want to thank Kiev, and also I want to thank His Excellency Umar Hadi and all the distinguished guests and all the attendees from on-site and online. Thank you all very much for being here with us. There was summit between Korea summit and also Mekong River summit meeting as well. And during these summit meetings, we had a lot of great outcome. November 15, ASEAN 10 countries, Korea, China, we finally signed RCEP. It was a historic moment. The RCEP is a great achievement, the largest FDA, whereas protectionism is sweeping around the world. RCEP is going to promote mutually beneficial trade relations and is also going to accelerate Korea's new Southern policy. And also during the summit between Korea and ASEAN, as a milestone of Korea's new Southern policy, President Moon announced a new Southern Policy Strategy +1, including main tasks. And this new Southern Policy Plus received a lot of support from ASEAN heads of state. And also, the comprehensive recovery framework adopted by ASEAN heads of state, President Moon sends his full support for that plan as well. So here today, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the new Southern Policy +1. It is centered around the 3P: people, prosperity, and peace. So in terms of people, we want to build a people-oriented community. To that end, we need to have healthcare wide comprehensive cooperation. And second, we'd love to share our education and human resources with our partner countries. And also we want to promote culture exchanges between Korea and ASEAN countries. Second P, prosperity. We want to pursue mutually beneficial trade and investment environment. And also, we want to promote infrastructure investment, including agriculture, and also cooperation in cutting-edge sectors, including technology. Lastly, in terms of peace, we want to build a community where people can be safe. This is going to be supranational community where people can work together for all kinds of non-traditional security threats, such as natural disasters and health disasters like COVID-19. COVID-19 is going to continue for the time being, and it's going to bring about significant changes in many aspects of our society. Korea, as a mid-level leading country, we want to help other countries, including ASEAN countries, to overcome COVID-19, and we also want to promote a win-win co-prosperity relationship with ASEAN countries. With ASEAN country, Korea continues to have bilateral communication, and we will pursue mutually beneficial direction in our future relationship. As partners, we hope that we can find more wisdom for our way forward. I hope that today's session will be a great forum for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your warm remarks. Next, His Excellency Umar Hadi, Ambassador of Indonesia to Korea, will be delivering a congratulatory remarks. He was not able to join us, so a video message was sent to us.
안녕하십니까. 저는 우말 하디, 인도네시아 대사입니다. Allow me at the outset to congratulate the National Research Council for Economics, Humanities and Social Sciences, the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy, and the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy for organizing today's session on ASEAN-Korea cooperation in this very auspicious event, the 2020 Global Korea Convention. I have been assigned in Seoul for more than 3 years now. I arrived in May 2017, and I was among the first foreign ambassadors presenting my credentials to President Moon Jae-in in July 2017. And 3 months later, in November 2017, President Moon Jae-in already made his state visit to Indonesia, and during which he announced the new Southern policy. I believe it was not an accident. It was by design and careful consideration. The new Southern policy has created what I call ASEAN fever in South Korea. Government, business communities, academia, they all opened their doors widely for cooperation with ASEAN. I have been very much enjoying my duties in South Korea because everyone is willing to work with ASEAN. The core values of new Southern policy are basically embedded in the nature of cooperation between ASEAN with all its dialogue partners. The 3 pillars of the ASEAN community, that is ASEAN Political Security Community, ASEAN Economic Community, and ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, share the common values and spirit with the new Southern policy, as they also focus on peace, prosperity, and people. Of course, this year, the COVID-19 global pandemic has required all of us to rethink and reshape our strategy. In a forum organized by the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy on 14 October 2020 about the future of the new Southern policy in the post-COVID-19 era, I proposed the formula of 4+1 to be the priority areas of the new Southern policy post-COVID-19. I proposed that the areas of cooperation should focus on 4 things: health, food, green, and digital. The +1 is peace. I am glad, therefore, that in November 2020, President Moon Jae-in announced the new Southern Policy Plus, that emphasizing on 7 key sectors: health and medical cooperation, education and human resource development, promotion of cultural exchange, trade and investment, farming and urban infrastructure, cooperation on future industry, cooperation in non-conventional security, and the +1 peace process in the Korean Peninsula. ASEAN and Korea are economic powerhouses in the region, endowed with a lot of compatibilities in terms of resources, from natural resources, human resources, capital, and technology, as well as compatibility in demography, and most importantly, compatibility in terms of visions. During the last ASEAN-ROK Summit on 12 November 2020, our leaders share the vision of transformation. Transformation to strive for progress and better future together. With the new Southern Policy Plus strategy and the recent monumental agreement of Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP, ASEAN and South Korea economic cooperation will become more vigorous. Next week, Indonesia and South Korea will also enter a new chapter in terms of economic cooperation. We are scheduled to sign the Indonesia-Korea Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. This IK-SEPA will be a historic achievement in our bilateral economic cooperation. The agreement is expected to boost Indonesia-South Korea trade and investment cooperation, in particular to help reach the target of bilateral trade value of $30 billion by 2022. The agreement will also be a key additional driver to a more accelerated ASEAN-Korea economic cooperation. I'm very optimistic that our partnership will be bigger, bringing more prosperity to our people, and thus we will be able to navigate the new world landscape post-pandemic of COVID-19. I do hope our distinguished speakers today would provide us with more insights on what ASEAN and Korea should strengthen in their present and future cooperation. This is the time that requires us to think bigger, do more, and move faster. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
대사님 좋은
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Umar Hadi, for your kind words. Now we're going to begin the presentations.
The first presenter is Professor Samyong Park. He's also the president of Korea Institution of Southeast Asian Studies. He's going to talk about East Asian Community and ASEAN-Korea Cooperation. I am a slow speaker, and today I am wearing even a mask, so I'm not sure if I can observe the time limit, but I will do my best. So, but just so you know, I've never succeeded in observing the given time limit, so I'd like to ask for your kind understanding. So this is my topic, East Asian Community and ASEAN-Korea Cooperation. East Asia. 99.99% of Korean people will think of Northeastern Asian alone when they hear the word East Asia. But in my presentation, East Asia means a really broader, much broader than just Northeast Asia. So this is the contents of my presentation, how the East Asian community developed, and it pursues political peace, economic prosperity, and cultural advance. I'm going to focus on peace, because I'm sure economic experts are going to talk about economy and cultural experts are going to talk about culture. So I want to focus on peace. The East Asia community The idea was first put forward by Jung-geun-an, who was an independence movement fighter during the Japanese colonial rule. So when he was in prison, his real goal was not just to defeat the colonial rule by Japan. His ultimate goal was to build peace in East Asia. To that end, he went ahead with his plan to assassinate the then Japanese governor in Korea. And also, in 1997 and 1998, there was an Asian financial crisis. So in the wake of the crisis, then President Kim Dae-jung proposed to build East Asia Vision Group, EAVG. So this group worked to build peace, prosperity, and progress in East Asia. And a measure of progress is human dignity. So these are very comprehensive goals. And then we had another global financial crisis in 2007, 2008. And around that time, EAVG marked a 10th anniversary. So to commemorate that, EAVG put forward the idea of East Asia Economic Community. And about 5 years ago, ASEAN Community was launched. So ASEAN Community is to build a basic framework for ASEAN Community, literally, for the 10-year period by 2025. So ASEAN plus 3, including Korea, Japan, and China, had a 22nd summit. Here, I am quoting the chair declaration. This year, this sentence is still the same. So let me read what I quoted from the declaration. We have the long-term goal of building East Asia community driven by ASEAN. And to that end, we pursue East Asia cooperation and we emphasize the importance of ASEAN plus 3. So the idea of East Asia community is not something new. It has been around for many years now. As such, the idea of East Asia community has been pursued consistently for the past few decades. But in reality, there has not been any substantial progress. Why is that? Peace. Well, we have some kind of economic foundation. For example, we have a certain level of economic integration in this region. And economic integration is the foundation for peace. So if you look at the slide here, if you look at the movement of the goods and movement of capital, movement of people, so you can see that the integration level in Asia, it is number 1 in terms of goods. It even surpasses Europe, and it falls slightly behind Europe in terms of the capital movement. So East Asian integration is really happening, at least economically. So some scholars are saying that economic integration is taking place very actively, whereas political conflicts are intensifying in East Asia. That is called East Asia paradox. So we have really political conflicts. But if you look at the economic integration, East Asia is much more integrated than EU. Intra-regional trading volume far surpasses that of the EU. If you look at the EU, they started with an economic community, and then they had later they moved towards a more policy integration as well. So in terms of economic integration, East Asia is doing really well, but the issue is political conflict. So here we had two major wars, the Korean War and the Vietnamese War. So we experienced the Cold War period, and we also had really fierce wars in East Asia. And even in the 21st century, we have territorial disputes. So as you can see on the map, on the right-hand side, you can see territorial disputes in the region. The green area, the pie chart, it shows the nations, the given countries, peoples' perception about the severity of such territorial dispute. So you can see that many people in this country consider the territorial disputes very seriously. This is really unprecedented. And it's hard to find in any other regions in the world. And also culturally as well. In East Asia, we have a lot of obstacles. For example, China, Japan, Korea, we do not trust each other. How about ASEAN countries? ASEAN countries trust each other, and also our trust towards ASEAN country is good. But if you look at the trust level of China, Korea, and Japan, it's like you cannot get anything done. On the left-hand chart, the red line means the mistrust between China and Japan is very high. And Korea is also similar. So, and also if you look at the numbers here, the mistrust numbers far surpass the trust numbers. But also, there was a peaceful period in East Asia for many centuries, leading up to the two world wars. So at that time, peace was here in East Asia. So, and also, Europe, if we can take a reference point from Europe, they had their own wars twice. So the current level of integration that Europe has, they were able to achieve that not because they never had conflict or mistrust or war. It's despite that. Because Europe had such conflict and war, they had a really determination to overcome that, so they were able to achieve integration. And in the 21st century, there are a lot of conflict as well. So we are saying that there's a new Cold War going on. So economic cooperation and integration are going well, but political tension is rising. So how can we address this? One way could be to build a new regional order. An order is not established by force. It is established by rules and compliance. And the East Asia community that we are pursuing, we have a lot of proposals and ideas from politicians and scholars. So with these inputs, we nailed it down to these basic principles on the slide: free, openness, embrace, and rules and ASEAN centrality. So that's what East Asia community pursues. But we don't know what China's One Belt, One Road projects pursues in terms of the basic principles. And the same goes for the India-Pacific relations between the US and Japan. So here, East Asia community is the only community vision that really explicitly pursues freedom and order and openness. And still, and that's not the case for One Belt, One Road and the Pacific India framework. Now let me talk about the regional order. There was no war in East Asia for the past 35 years. Can we really see this as something natural? It's not something natural, actually. We still do not have well-established regional order. Europe is highly developed, and Middle East is not so developed. And East Asia is somewhere in between. So we need to build a more healthier regional order. But what kind of order do we want to pursue? Are we going to be still reliant on the US-Japanese alliance? Some countries believe so. So this is a survey for each country. So the yellow bars indicate people who believe in the need for new order. So the yellow bar here, people are saying then we need to pursue a new, different kind of order. But regional order is kind of a regional public good. But how can you pursue regional order when there is an alliance between the US and Japan? And these two are not to substitute each other, actually. They are to complement each other. So just because we need to build a new regional order, I'm not saying that we need to get rid of the existing alliance relationship. And also here, some people strongly advocate East Asia Community Regional Order led by the US-Japan alliance. But if you look at some other recent survey, they say that ASEAN-oriented community order is important. So actually 37% of respondents went for it. And the next idea was the US-Japan alliance-led community order, followed by Japan-oriented regional order. So this is a survey done on the Japanese public. So here, the commonality is that they feel the need for an order in this region, a regional order. Then what about coalition between Korea and ASEAN? So, for example, economic foundation, cultural foundation, they are already being laid down very smoothly. And this is going to be my last point. So in the area of international politics, there are some paradigms that go against each other. For example, real politics and constructivism, libertarianism. So from these perspectives, even if we take all these approaches, we cannot resolve all the challenges in East Asia region. So we really need to have peaceful. We need to have a framework for peace. And many. And also, here in this region, balance of power is a really big issue. There is a power conflict going on between China and India, for example. So that's a destabilizing factor in this area. But there is not much in-depth discussion going on about how to resolve this. So if we want to really move towards an East Asian community, then this conflict needs to be weakened. But rather than that, that's traditional view. Traditionally, people believe that if we weaken the conflict, we can strengthen cooperation. But actually, if we can strengthen the cooperation, that can lead to weakening conflict. So maybe we can shift the way we think about how to promote cooperation. And one way to do so was to promote cooperation between Korea and ASEAN community. So if we cannot have an East Asian community right away, maybe as an interim structure, we can maybe first pursue closer community between Korea and ASEAN. And East Asia Vision Group 2 is in place. And next, we are going to pursue East Asia Vision Group 3. That maybe in the Vision Group 3, I believe we can draft a vision statement for closer community between Korea and ASEAN. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation.
Next, Dr. Bonsun Park from Korea University will be talking about ways to strengthen economic cooperation between Korea and ASEAN region.
예, 저 박본순입니다.
Good morning. I am Bonsun Park. The title that was given to me was Ways for Achieving Inclusive Economic Cooperation Between Korea and the ASEAN region. The Korean government is pursuing the new Southern policy, and part of that, that strategy is really about co-prosperity and coexistence. And so the Korean government is really pushing forward an inclusive set of policies. And the Korean government is going to announce soon a more updated version of the new Southern policy. So whatever recommendations I present today will probably be included in the policy that will be announced in the near future. So I want to focus my presentation on how we can strengthen the economic cooperation and what we must do in order to have better economic cooperation. So I'm going to talk about the characteristics of the ASEAN economy, and also the nature of the economic cooperation between Korea and ASEAN thus far, and what we must do to achieve a more inclusive economic cooperation. The ASEAN economic region incorporates many countries at varying levels of development, and most of these countries have developed their economy based on manufacturing industry. And since the Plaza Accord, there was more investment by multinational companies, and ASEAN's manufacturing grew. Now here, this shows that the ASEAN 5 and Korea's product export as a percentage of GDP had grown up to a certain point and then started to decline. Thailand and Vietnam are newly emerging industrial countries. So with Vietnam, I think that this percentage will continue to grow. But with the other ASEAN countries, this percentage is showing a decline more recently. So we can see that they almost hit a peak at around 2000, and the decline started to begin. So why is this export as a percentage of GDP declining? And this is because of the premature deindustrialization that is happening in the key ASEAN countries. So what's the impact of this premature deindustrialization? This will slow down the economic growth, and this will lead to the countries affected to be trapped in the middle country trap. And again, in terms of production, in 2000, they hit a peak. And they are already starting to see the percentage of manufacturing in the overall production decline after hitting a peak in 2000. And likewise, the manufacturing's share in the employment sector is also declining in the ASEAN's key countries. Another important issue with the ASEAN economy is that although an economic community was launched in 2015, and of course, there were many reasons that they did so, because if an economic community is created in the region, the economy of scale can be achieved by the companies in this region. But it seems that this economic community is not really effective in creating this economy of scale. Now, this shows the share of ASEAN's, the import from ASEAN countries in Korea and in China. So you can see that the import from China is growing significantly, while import from ASEAN is actually, declining or almost stunted. So there is a need to compete better with China. But it's very difficult for ASEAN's manufacturing sector to position competitively against China. And in fact, the ASEAN manufacturing is now sort of becoming a subsector that supports China or is falling behind China. And there are a number of indicators that do not bode well. And this is child mortality numbers in the middle of this column. And this also shows the secondary school graduation rate. And these figures show that the ASEAN economies are at varying stages of development. And therefore, because of this diversity and gap, it is very difficult for the ASEAN community become a more unified community. So it is all the more necessary to have inclusive strategies to embrace all the different countries affected by these gaps. And one of the most significant and influential gaps is the income gap. So the percentage of wealth owned by the top 1% is 33% in Singapore, but it's much higher in Thailand, and it stands at 58%, and in Indonesia, it's almost 50%, whereas in Korea, it's much lower at 28%. So this wide income gap is a significant problem, and we need also to think about how we can contribute to potentially narrowing this income gap. So what is the nature of economic cooperation between Korea and ASEAN? I have here the ASEAN's share in export and import. So we have exported about 17.5% towards ASEAN region in 2019. And toward China, we exported 25% of our total export. So ASEAN, although it's smaller in percentage than China, it is still an important export market to Korea. And we can see that in 2010, ASEAN's share in Korea's export trade was only 11%, but it grew to 17% in 2019. So there was significant growth in ASEAN's percentage in export by Korea. Whereas in China, you can see China's percentage in Korea's export has pretty much stayed the same. So ASEAN is really becoming more influential as a trade partner to Korea. But also, we have to note that Vietnam is a source of a distorted picture about the nature of economic cooperation between Korea and ASEAN. Because in 2012, our export to the ASEAN region, ex-Vietnam, was very high. But since then, Korean export to ASEAN, ex-Vietnam, has dramatically declined. And so if we exclude Vietnam, we can say that our export to the ASEAN region has actually declined. So we need to see through the ASEAN figures by excluding the Vietnam's portion. So again, Vietnam takes up a significant share of our export to the ASEAN region, and also Vietnam accounts for a lion's share of our investment into the ASEAN region. So why is it that investment in countries other than Vietnam, declining? That's something that we need to look into. Now, this is the trade balance between Korea and ASEAN. In the 1990s, we had maintained a trade surplus, and the extent of the trade surplus has continuously grown over the years. So when we want to promote our reciprocality and economic cooperation, we need to think about really increasing export on both sides of the aisle. So how can we actually increase import from ASEAN region is a challenge. So how must we achieve more inclusive economic cooperation? I think the manufacturing sector in the ASEAN region must evolve and develop. On the right side of the slide, you can see the export volumes of key ASEAN countries. Of course, Vietnam is the country where export volume has grown most dramatically. So how to reinvigorate the manufacturing sector in ASEAN would be key to the strategy for a more inclusive cooperation in economy. So we need to cooperate with ASEAN to potentially contribute to revitalization of their manufacturing. So we need both the government sector and also the private sector working with our ASEAN partners to do so. And we need to have more partnership for technology transfer and to strengthen the SME cooperation. And we also need to expand investment into the ASEAN countries that are outside of Vietnam. And also, we need to have more Korean companies maybe participate in the management of the local companies with great export potential. And also, we need to look into identifying comparative advantages within ASEAN region. I mentioned before that vis-a-vis China, it's very difficult for ASEAN to keep its manufacturing competitive. So perhaps we could identify some areas where comparative advantage is possible, such as agricultural and food processing industries. And we also need to strengthen efforts to form supply chains in the ASEAN region. You know, the Japanese Prime Minister visited Hanoi in Vietnam recently, and in his speech, he announced that the Japanese companies will increase their production of parts and purchasing of parts from Vietnam. And that is a very good strategy that Japan has put forth. And we also need to do something similar. And we also need to involve more in the R&D sector as well. If you look at these countries here, Thailand and Philippines and Indonesia, their R&D expenditure vis-a-vis their GDP is very minimal. So in Thailand, it's only 0.36% of the GDP, and in the Philippines, it's 0.11%, and Indonesia, it's 0.08%. It's very minimal. And also, if you look at the number of patent applications filed, Korea between 2016 and 2018 on average was 160,000 patents applied. But in Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia, you know, the numbers are significantly less. So it is important for us to support this R&D investment in these countries. And also, we need to support the economic integration of the ASEAN community. ASEAN community was established in order to help its manufacturing firms achieve economy of scale. And so we also need to support ASEAN region to achieve the sort of integration necessary. And also we need to support the effort by ASEAN countries to nurture their human talent. We could maybe invite more graduate school students from engineering schools in the ASEAN region to Korea to train them. And also we could help train the low-skilled laborers and provide more technology transfers. And we need to continue to pursue our new Southern policy, and we need to be very open to the ASEAN region. Of course, the Korean people are very interested in benefiting from international cooperation, but I think it is also important for the sake of building trust over the longer term to really look into the needs of the ASEAN partners and see where we can really help them. Thank you very much.
And now we are going to listen to Professor Hyung-Jong Kim. His presentation is about ASEAN societal cultural community and cooperation between Korea and ASEAN in the post-COVID-19 world. Hello, I am Hyung-Jong Kim from Yonsei University. So let me start my presentation. This is what I want to talk about today. The cultural and social cooperation between Korea and ASEAN, and also the implications, social and cultural implications from COVID-19, and what's the significance of cultural and social cooperation in the new Southern policy. When we talk about social area or cultural area, compared to other cooperation areas such as policy or economy, people think that it's easier to cooperate in social or cultural areas. And also people tend to not prioritize social and cultural cooperation. But in reality, social and cultural spheres have really wide implications, and also it can be the foundation for political and economic cooperation. So by social and cultural area, I mean culture, education, healthcare, welfare, labor, poverty, environment, disaster, youth, information. So this is a very comprehensive concept. And we want to progress in all this area. So this ASEAN social and cultural community, the discussion only began late compared to other two pillars of the ASEAN community, but this pillar is most broad in scope. Once again, these are some main vision element for ASCC, ASEAN Social and Cultural Community. I think earlier speaker also touched upon this, but basically it's a well-balanced, progressive, sustainable community. And the social culture heritage. Social culture heritage is important, and also in ASEAN way, the social cultural cooperation is a major cooperation method. So, for example, whereas they were pursuing a cooperation method for the ASEAN region, they wanted to emphasize the cultural commonality and also common identity as well. So here, basically, decision making is done by consensus and consultation. And there are some limitations, of course, but this ASEAN way so far has been able to deal with many sensitive issues. By 2025, there are some specific goals to meet to achieve ASEAN Social and Cultural Community, ASCC. And just this November, we had an interim evaluation result. So the implementation rate was about 71.8%, and the completion rate was about 24.8%. If you look at the activity types, capacity building, research and publication, public activities, policy formation, and other basic activities. But in terms of pursuing ASCC, of course, there are some challenges and issues. Particularly in the context of the ASCC, its vision and implementation, paradoxically speaking, social aspect is a bit lacking. So market mechanism is currently used, particularly for the reason of efficiency. So for the sake of efficiency, private sector companies are allowed, and also some social welfare area is pursuing more participation of private company. So in a way, it's kind of paradoxical. Another paradoxical situation is that cultural aspect is also lacking in the current pursuit of ASCC. But the real issue is that the social and cultural issues tend to take less importance compared to other political issues, for example, security. So, but political issues also have social and cultural elements. For example, human security, disaster management, women and children rights. So to deal with these issues, we need to promote more cooperation and consultation. And also, it's the ASCC, and even though ASCC has specific goals in terms of realizing its vision, the vision is hard to measure. For example, promotion, contribution, these things are hard to measure. And now I want to talk about COVID-19 situation in ASEAN. Within ASEAN, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Myanmar, they are relatively hit hard, and there is an increase in the number of new cases. But in other countries, it's relatively in control. Despite this disparity, ASEAN, they are putting forward a common approach to deal with COVID-19. And again, there is a difference in terms of the prevalence of COVID-19 country by country, but countries' response measures are not that different. So as you can see here, so if you look at the measures such as closing down schools or work from home and lockdown, they are taking similar measures in ASEAN countries. And also, so these days, disease control, infectious disease control is another important element of the ASCC. And given the economic implications from COVID-19, these kind of response measures are understandable, but I want to mention that these measures have impact on social and cultural cooperation as well. First, if you look at the employment portion in the informal economy, it's quite high. So in ASEAN countries, the informal economic sector are major employers. So the vulnerable groups in society, they are growing. And despite the active intervention from the government, there's still potential for bigger gap between different economic classes. And also there is an increase in domestic violence against women. And women and children's rights issues are an important aspect of ASCC. But nowadays, there is an increase in domestic violence due to COVID-19. And another implication from COVID-19 is xenophobia. It's according to IFRC survey, particularly in the case of Malaysia, Indonesia, about 50% of respondents showed hostility towards the foreign nationals. They answered that foreigners are responsible for the spread of COVID-19. And also among the vulnerable groups that I mentioned, vulnerable groups include refugees. Certain countries implemented a really strong crackdown on foreign migrant workers. So migrant workers sometimes lost their jobs, so they were put in economic difficulty and also psychological stress. So the suicide rate among these foreign workers, migrant workers, went up. And this kind of anxiety and psychological issues still continue with the spread of COVID-19. So these vulnerable people, they are vulnerable not just physically from COVID-19, but also vulnerable economically and also socially. So in that case, so given that, COVID-19 is not just a healthcare crisis, not just economic crisis, but is also a cultural, social crisis in terms of undermining our community. So, of course, the society security and safety is important, but we also need to think about each person's safety and security as well. So we need to be more human-oriented when we take countermeasures to COVID-19. Now I want to talk about new Southern policy and the social cultural cooperation in the policy. So we can think about first the people. So ultimately, New Southern policy pursues a people-oriented community. So it's not just limited to society and culture. It's really all-encompassing concept about people. And of course, due to COVID-19, there are some issues. And also, I talked about the need for cultural and social cooperation, and I enumerated some specific areas where we can cooperate. For example, comprehensive healthcare cooperation to deal with COVID-19 and sharing education model, etc. Then what are some obstacles for social and cultural cooperation? One obstacle is perception. According to a perception survey conducted on both Korean and ASEAN youth towards each other, so the question here is that which Korean sector is more attractive to ASEAN? Number one was the K-entertainment, K-pop, K-drama, and K-beauty. And next was economic development. But from Korea's And also, the question was, what aspect of ASEAN do you think is most attractive to Korea? Number one was resources, natural resources. So the New Southern Policy and +1, we talk about bilateral cooperation. So we need to think about this perception. We need to think about the gap in the perception, how ASEAN youth perceive Korea, and how Korean youth perceive ASEAN. And it is not easy to correct misconception. If you look at the awareness of importance about ASEAN policy, here this Korean people's perception, as you can see here, the numbers are not so high. So Korean people feel the need for ODA and development assistance, but still compared to security issues or entertainment area, ODA takes a much lower position. And so we have specific cooperation plan for 5 areas, although we have some challenges. And content is also being exported a lot. But in terms of import, the cultural contents from ASEAN is not much imported into Korea compared to contents from other countries, as you can see here. So this is what we could observe. And also in terms of the visa waiver agreement status, even though we enjoy visa waiver status vis-a-vis some ASEAN countries, the ASEAN countries do not enjoy the same level of visa waiver program from Korea. So ultimately, we need to understand Korean ASEAN social cultural cooperation as a broad concept, and it is a concept of values. And also with the COVID-19, we need to think more about people, and also we need to mutually recognize each other in important cooperation areas. And perhaps we also need to avoid market-oriented approach. We need to pursue social economic values more. And also we need to have a more institutionalized cooperation method. Social and cultural cooperation deals with just so many issues. So in order for us to have institutional framework for cooperation, it takes policy support and financial support as well. And there is a status of the ASEAN Republic Korean Cooperation Fund. And also, we need to have more regularized, institutionalized networking between Korea and ASEAN in the area of social and cultural cooperation. And currently, the social cultural cooperation is a bit fragmented. So if we can have a more institutional framework, it will be very beneficial. Thank you.
Now we're going to begin our panel discussion. Mr. Kwon Yul will be the moderator for this session, and we're going to invite the presenters and the panelists to take their respective seats on the stage.
네,
So we have heard presentations from the three speakers. Politics, economy, and social society and culture were areas of cooperation which were touched upon by the three presentations. And we were delayed a little bit by the presentations, but we have to finish by 12:50. So we have about 30 minutes for the panel discussion. We have three panelists with us. We have with us Mr. Young-sun Kim, who was formerly the Korean ambassador to Indonesia. And we have Mr. Jae-myung Park, director of ASEAN Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Ms. Eun-hee who is a senior research fellow at Seoul National University. So I will give 7 minutes to each panelist, max, and we will perhaps exchange questions and answers afterwards. So, Mr. Young-sun Kim, please go ahead with your comments. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I enjoy the presentations very much. So I'd like to briefly deliver my comments on the new Southern policy. Dr. Park talked about how the ASEAN-Korea cooperation need to contribute to the prosperity and peace on the broader Asia. And I think it is very important to keep that in mind as we pursue cooperation in this region. When we think about East Asian cooperation, we focus a lot on the relationships between Korea, China, and Japan, and there are many challenges. And one of the ways to maybe improve the situation in this region would be to strengthen our partnership with the ASEAN region. Korea, Japan, and China, all three countries see ASEAN as an important partner. So I think therefore, strengthening cooperation with ASEAN will be more critical for this region. And we have the right international mechanisms for promoting international cooperation. There's the ASEAN +3. And ASEAN +3 has been very instrumental in improving relations, especially when ASEAN Asian financial crisis hit. There was the Chiang Mai initiative that helped a lot. And also, during the pandemic, the ASEAN region came up with the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. Of course, we have the New Southern Policy and New Southern Policy Plus, which seeks to improve our relations with ASEAN. And I think although it's important for Korea to make efforts, it would be more effective if we could work with China and Japan in doing so. Last month, ASEAN +3 summit was held, and these issues were discussed. New Southern Policy emphasizes the importance of cooperation with ASEAN, and I think it is very important to recognize the strategic importance of ASEAN. People often think about economic cooperation or having cultural exchanges, but today we are living in a very uncertain age. Therefore, we need to promote more strategic cooperation based on the new Southern policy. Especially the political landscape in this region is impacted by the U.S.-China competition and conflict, which has caused a lot of uncertainties. Also, there are tendency to put one's national interests above everything else, and this makes cooperation a little bit difficult. But fortunately, Korea, as a middle power, are in a better position to perhaps connect with the ASEAN countries. And through the new Southern policy, we really need to improve our communication, exchange, and collaboration with ASEAN region. And Dr. Park talked about inclusive economic cooperation. I think that is very important that we focus on the inclusive aspect of this. He has analyzed the actual international cooperation and international relationship between Korea and ASEAN. There has been a one-sided trade deficit and surplus relationship, and also the increase of trade with ASEAN is skewed largely to Vietnam. These are some things that we need to be mindful of. And also, Professor Park made recommendations on how to promote more inclusive economic cooperation, and I would like to add to that and maybe ask questions about that. We talk a lot about global value chain and reorganizing that global value chain. More specifically, it's about overdependence on China, which can create risks for supply chain disruptions. And as an alternative, how much of a role can ASEAN play? There are two different opinions on this. ASEAN does not have the capacity to really serve as an alternative to China. And then the other side, the other opinion would be that the ASEAN could be a very good alternative. If we look at the situation of partnership between companies, for example, Samsung is working very closely with Vietnam to develop technologies and expand its value chain. But I think outside of this, I would like to know more about what kind of potential ASEAN has to serve as an important link in the global value chain. And Professor Kim talked about the ASEAN. Excuse me, Professor Park. I would like to ask Professor Park if he has any ideas as to how or what mechanisms we can use to foster more inclusive cooperation with the ASEAN region. And finally, through the new Southern policy, can we actually see tangible results going forward? Oftentimes, the business sector say that these policies are good in paper, but often does not have real benefits. So I would like to understand about the potential for real meaningful outcomes. And Professor Kim talked about creating a social and cultural community in the ASEAN region. I would like to make a couple of comments about this. I think partnership is built on good understanding between the parties involved, which could then lead to friendship and trust. So we really need to understand what needs we have. And so perhaps Korea and ASEAN could carry out an in-depth survey of needs and interests and maybe make this a regular thing so that we can be on top of what needs actually exist. And also, he proposed institutionalizing networks for better cooperation. So how to raise the efficiency of cooperation through institutionalized networks, I think, is important. It is important that one has the capacity to really make these networks workable. In Busan, they have some very good infrastructure, hardware in place for networking with the ASEAN region, but I don't know what meaningful networking actually does take place. Because there are some exhibitions that showcase, information about the ASEAN region, but is there meaningful research taking place? Are research outcomes being accumulated over time? I think on these questions, we don't have clear answers, and I hope that we can improve on that so that a meaningful social and cultural community and cooperation with ASEAN can be built. Next year is the year of Mekong Korea exchange. And this year, we are very much challenged by the COVID-19, and next year, that impact might continue. So we need to work around that for meaningful exchange. ASEAN is an important partner to Korea. We share similar visions for co-prosperity in the region. We need each other, we like each other, and ASEAN is an important and valuable partner to Korea. Therefore, new Southern policy should actually transcend administrations or political parties, and I believe new Southern policy should continue to be implemented regardless of the potential administration change. And there is a focus on people-centric and reciprocal partnership that is an important element of the new Southern policy. So I think this should really be put into practice for a continued and meaningful cooperation. And of course, the people on both sides should be aware of these principles embedded in the policy so that we can really build meaningful trust. With this, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you very much. Mr. Kim has really commented on all three presentations and all areas of cooperation. And so I would like to ask the other panelists to limit your comments to maybe 5 minutes so that there can be some answers can be given by the presenters.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the organizers, KIEP and Mr. Kwon Yul of KIEP and other organizers as well. So thank you very much. And also we have speakers from KIEP, and also we have panelists here. I didn't have much chance to meet with you throughout this year, but finally today, even though there is a screen standing between us, it is such a pleasure to meet all of you in person. And thank you very much for your presentations. I want to share some points. So I don't think I can make a detailed comments because all three presenters were very comprehensive. So I want to share just a few main points. First, Professor Samyang Park, Professor Park talked about East Asia community. He emphasized the East Asia community. So I thought about New Southern policy towards ASEAN. So the philosophical background as well. It was a great reminder of those philosophy for me. And also, Korea's policy towards ASEAN is a big policy area That's one. And the second is the regional connection, regional link, regional link for East Asia. That's another aspect. So there are three pillars for the ASEAN community. So there are three pillars in the new Southern policy. So these three pillars are actually consistent with the three pillars of ASEAN: political security, economy, and social culture. So three pillars. ASEAN on its own selected these three pillars for the ASEAN community, and Korea's southern policy towards ASEAN have the same three pillars. In the history, we didn't have much sensitive issues politically or security-wise, and we have really active exchange in terms of culture, particularly in the entertainment area. Korean entertainment brought the two regions, Korea and ASEAN, much closer. And in Korea, we have high expectations about ASEAN. And we've been pursuing the new Southern policy for about 3 years now. And also, there was a recent summit. So at the summit, President Moon announced new Southern policy +1. And during that announcement, all the heads of state present from ASEAN showed their support. And Professor Park talked about Korea, Japan, and China a lot in the context of East Asia. But actually, Australia and US and even Russia, they also want to participate because they understand the importance of ASEAN. What is also interesting recently is that even European countries like France, Germany, and also the UK, in the wake of the Brexit referendum, they're now paying more attention to ASEAN as well. So if you look at their recent policies, definitely ASEAN is now on their map. So that's something I wanted to share with you. So whether it's called East Asian Community or it's going to have some other name, but the cooperation needs to be open, transparent, and inclusive. When that is ensured, then I think that whether it's going to be the US-led India-Pacific strategy or One Belt, One Road project driven by Japan, our Southern policy can work with these other frameworks as well. And also, we heard about the Korean-ASEAN economic ties from Professor Boksun Bak. The new Southern policy +1, economy is emphasized, and there are some keywords. For example, trade and investment. Trade and investment between Korea and ASEAN needs to be promoted. Basically, it is about how to liberalize this area. RCEP. So 15 countries signed RCEP recently. Now RCEP is a mega FTA. In terms of the GDP, it takes about 30% of the global GDP. So RCEP is now a major mega free trade deal in the world. And to implement it early, to bring it into effect early, the Korean government is working hard. So we want to fully utilize it. And along with that, Korean government is going to make more effort to further liberalize our economic ties with ASEAN. There's also going to be SEPA, which is a bilateral trade agreement between Korea and other country, and also between Korea and Cambodia as well. Bilateral FTA is in progress. So regarding trade and investment, private sector companies are also important as well. For example, we are now developing economic cooperation complex. One example is near Yangon in Myanmar. So we are now building economic cooperation complex so that more Korean company can come and do business in ASEAN. And so for Korean companies, some Korean companies are already in Myanmar and some want to enter Myanmar. So this industrial complex in Myanmar, we are going to break the ground at the end of this month. Another area for cooperation is finance. ASEAN, each ASEAN country has its own infrastructure development plan. Infrastructure development requires financing. And Korea has great financial companies, financial institutions. So we are going to build during the first half of this year, we are going to have the financial support center. There is a Korean representative office in Jakarta. So we are going to open an office inside that office for financial support. And ICT is an important area for cooperation as well. Due to COVID-19, digital transformation to digital economy is really important in ASEAN right now. The economic backbones in this area are SMEs, small and medium enterprises. And ASEAN countries are now promoting SMEs to migrate to digital technology. So to assist that effort, Korea also has a cooperation framework as well. And also, smart city is an area where Korea is happy to lend its assistance to ASEAN. So the Ministry of Land and Transport in Korea is providing a program for that. So smart city and ICT efforts are going on in Yangon, Myanmar, and other countries as well. So this has been a quick summary of the three main elements of the economic ties between Korea and ASEAN. And Professor Kim also talked about COVID-19 and healthcare cooperation with the backdrop of COVID-19. And after the COVID-19 outbreak, we provided materials to ASEAN, for example, test kits and masks. And second, we conducted web seminars on multiple occasions to enhance ASEAN's capacity to deal with healthcare issues. And we shared the K-quarantine experience during the web seminar, and also our national health insurance system. It's something that ASEAN countries were very much interested in. So we also had a webinar about that as well. And also at the governmental level, we decided to have a health ministerial meeting. So we are going to plan the health ministerial meeting between Korea and ASEAN. In terms of the cultural and social exchange, we had a recent event at KBS in Yeouido area. Of course, it was a contactless event, but it went on about for 7 hours, and Korean singers appeared and performed, and also ASEAN singers performed as well. So total about 20 singers performed online, and it was streamed on YouTube. And also, its edited version is going to be aired by KBS. So that event was organized in consultation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I cannot share every effort the government is making to promote cooperation between Korea and ASEAN, but a lot is going on. Thank you.
너무 제한된 시간.
So, as the director of the ASEAN Affairs at the Foreign Ministry, I believe you have a lot more to say, but we don't have enough time, and it's very sad that we're not able to hear everything that you have to say. Now, Dr. Could you maybe limit your comments to 4 minutes? About cooperation opportunities. Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Eun-hee from Seoul National University. I was given only 4 minutes, but I have to point one thing out. Not just in this session, but during the 3 days of the Global Korea Convention, I am very active on the social network site, and there was a comment about this convention, and there was a comment about how there were certain sessions where maybe only one woman or no women were present as panelists and presenters, and so I think this is a global event, and since we are talking about international cooperation, I hope that we can have more people in their 30s and 40s, the younger working level experts, can be invited, and not just the heads of organizations invited as presenters. And I would also like to see more women presenters and discussants. So this is one recommendation I have for a Global Korea Convention for next year's convention. And I want to make a meaningful contribution to today's session. And with regards to new Southern policy, I think this is one of the greatest achievements of the Moon Jae-in administration. And we have Kiev here, which organized the session, and we have the experts here. I think all of us, we really need to work hard towards strengthening international cooperation with ASEAN. And we have been working very hard till now, so I would like to recognize that. I prepared some comments on Dr. Park and Professor Park's presentations, but I'm just going to focus my comments on the social and cultural cooperation as was suggested by the moderator. So I would like to talk about what we can do here in Korea and what we need to do with ASEAN partners. In the presentation by, Dr. Park actually conducted the perception survey, and this perception survey was very successful, but it was a one-time thing and it was not continued afterwards. And I think it's very important to have an understanding of how we see each other. So I think it is very important for us to do a perception survey. And of course, perception needs to be improved, and we need to make efforts to improve it. And when such efforts are taken, I think it is important to see what outcomes were achieved as a result of it. So maybe a survey before and after such efforts on perception can be done in order to make meaningful analysis. And also, I also think that there needs to be a lot of research projects on urbanization and digital transformation, and perhaps after those projects are conducted, we could do a perception survey afterwards so that we can compare how the perceptions mutually have evolved before and after such projects. And I think that COVID-19 has had a significant impact in ASEAN region, and the presenter mentioned the increase in domestic violence and the increased vulnerability of women. And COVID-19 has actually led to weakening of democracy and oppression of media and advocates. And authoritarianism has actually gone up in the ASEAN region as a result of COVID-19. Of course, we don't want to we want to be very careful when we make any comments on this kind of changes in the society in ASEAN region from an outsider's perspective. We have to be very careful, but I do nevertheless feel that it is important to foster the civil society in the ASEAN region to have greater capacity to advocate for the needs and issues of the vulnerable groups, and we need to have more close relationship with the CSOs in ASEAN region. I conducted a research, and we will be also doing a follow-up project. Basically, it's this. There is a center, art center in Gwangju, and they're going to do a research project and exhibition which focuses on the migration, refugee issue, women's issue, human rights issues surrounding ASEAN region. I'm going to be responsible for the Philippines. But of course, this art center, which is called ACC, they're going to also have other researchers covering other countries. And perhaps there can be some comparison made between the late Kim Dae-jung and Nino Aquino, who is a well-known figure in the Philippines. So that we can not only look at the cultural aspects, but perhaps more touch on democracy can be made through this project. And so I hope that the relevant government funding agencies can actually support this project. Thank you very much.
자체가 글로벌 코리아 포럼
On the Global Korea Convention, it's a forum for cooperation. So sharing ideas and working with each other, that's really in the spirit of this convention. And today we've listened to many great ideas about how to further cooperation and exchanges. So thank you very much for all your contributions, and particularly in the area of women's issues. I feel the need to prioritize women's issues more going forward. So thank you very much for your input. We don't have much time left, so I don't think we can accommodate all the questions and comments that came out. But during this discussion, I think some of the answers were, some of the questions were already answered. So each presenter, maybe you can emphasize a major point for 1 minute. Yes, thank you very much for all your valuable contribution. I think Director Park missed out some point. So next year marks the EVG 20 years. So we are going to have East Asia Vision Group 3 soon to be launched. So I asked about the plan about that, but I don't think I heard answer. Maybe because we're running out of time. So so now there is a kind of a competition between cooperation frameworks. For example, between One Belt, One Road and Pacific India Alliance. The only alternative to this competition framework, the only alternative to lessen the new Cold War atmosphere is ASEAN and Korea. So to that end, I think we really need to promote Korea and ASEAN ties.
예, 우리 김영선 대사님이
Mr. Kim provided very good comments and very important questions, but we don't have time enough to cover everything. The GVC and RVC is being reorganized, and I am very interested in this, and I'm following this, but I think there are some, exaggeration. Many people are saying that companies are leaving China because of the global supply chain disruption, but I don't know, how extensive that is actually happening. The Northeast Asian companies are could potentially invest in parts production in ASEAN, and those parts maybe then be exported to China, where it's assembled into finished products. I think that might be the way forward in the future. I think that's just my the picture I have. And so in that picture, it would be very important for Korea to secure a very favorable position.
그게 이제
I agreed with Dr. Park. Yes, given that I talked about the concept of human safety, human security. So, and also human security was an element in the new Southern policy +1, and so I think the human security was a bit lacking in the new Southern policy +1. So maybe civil society can work to boost it up. Networking is important, and in the economic field we have area, but in the social culture area, maybe we can have some kind of institutionalized networking, cooperation, and also because of the COVID-19, there were some assistance, bilateral assistance. But with the Chiang Mai initiative, Korea made Northeast Asia healthcare cooperation, but I hope we can see similar healthcare cooperation between Korea and ASEAN as well. Thank you very much for your presentations and the comments. I think that was very comprehensive. We had a very comprehensive session. We touched upon all the major issues. So economic integration in the area can strengthen our mutual dependence. And EU is a very interesting example. EU, despite the international crisis, in the EU, the internal conflict intensified. But in Asia, in ASEAN, they are dealing with a crisis much better, it seems, with more concerted effort. So I hope that that will be a beacon to guide our future. But still, we still have a lot to do. For example, we need to bring up the development level in these countries. Some countries are still very much less developed. They don't have mature industries. So we need to work on that. Today, we listened to a lot of presentations and comments, and I believe that all this was a great foundation to build better cooperation. Okay, so I will ask you to make concluding remarks for 10 seconds. Especially the East Asia Vision Group 3. Yes, I know it's very important, so I will review that. Yes, Kiev has actually played the role of secretariat to East Asia Vision Group 1 and 2. So I look forward to seeing East Asia Vision Group 3.
알려지지 않았지만 2차
Well, East Asia Vision Group 2 was actually very much requested by ASEAN countries as well. So yes, please support the East Asia Vision Group 3. All of us here are playing very important roles in promoting partnership with ASEAN, and I hope that Global Korea Convention can continue to serve as an important platform where ideas are shared for better cooperation. And my institution, Kiev, will also make every effort to contribute. Again, I would like to thank all of the participants, the presenters and panelists for being here with us. Thank you very much. This concludes our seminar.